Well, welcome one and all to Wright Constable and Skeen LLP's webinar. We are speaking today and welcoming our J-1 physician residents. And the topic of today's discussion will be immigration for J-1 physicians. Are you prepared for the upcoming J-1 waiver season? A cogent question, and one that we hope after this seminar you most certainly will be. And why am I so confident? Because today I'm joined by the great Jan Pederson, who's very much the doyenne, the godmother of J-1 physicians in America. And she's been a tireless mentor to hundreds and thousands of J-1 physicians throughout her career, having richly deserved the reputation amongst her peers and fellow attorneys as the best in the industry. Ever since the 1990s, she has been fighting to establish the J-1 waiver programs and on your behalf as J-1 physicians, and she's been a tireless advocate for decades for J-1 physicians and their employers, hospitals, and clinics. I am Benjamin Hu. I'm very proud to be here. I'm an immigration attorney who works with Jan and also a former journalist. The latter skill set helps significantly when I'm helping to craft your J-1 waiver applications. This webinar, the necessary legal disclaimer, this webinar is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute formal legal advice. Participation in this webinar, while very welcome, does not create an attorney-client relationship between Wright, Constable, and Skeen and the participant. Moreover, the opinions expressed at or through this webinar are the opinions of the attorneys only, and they may not reflect the opinions of the firm or any individual at the firm. This session is being recorded. It will be available at YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. So without further ado, let's begin. So Jan, regarding J-1 physicians, like any other job search, we have to start at the top. And how would you recommend that a prospective J-1 physician set about finding this very important decision?
Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for attending. I think we have lots of people in the audience today, and please send in your messages through our chat room. We're leaving 15 minutes at the end for questions. I see we have people from the State 30 program here. We have employers. We have lots and lots of J-1 physicians. Welcome to you all, and thank you for all you do for healthcare in America. So first of all, a waiver job. Okay. Look at it as an opportunity for a great future for you and your family, not a 3-year prison sentence. Okay. We see all too often these days that sometimes both employers and employees look at it as a 3-year prison sentence. Oh, it's a waiver job. I can't expect much. No, you can expect a lot, and you should expect a lot. Okay, so apply early and cast a nationwide net for jobs. Don't just say, I'm only going to be in Baltimore. I got to be in Baltimore because my third cousin Vinny lives in Baltimore. No, look everywhere. If you go to your interview and said, I got to be here because my brother's here, my sister's here, the offered wage will go down if you say, I'm only going to look there. All right, so keep your options open. Now, the first thing you want to do is bring yourself to the attention of a prospective employer through getting your resume out there. You can either send your resume directly or post on one of the many job boards. J-1 physician employers often look for J-1 physician candidates on 3rnet.org. We'll put that in the chat. Go there, post your resume. There are also available job openings. And of course, post your resume on many other nets, but as in anything else, your network that you have established through your time in America is probably going to be your best bet. Next rule, send a resume with a color photo of you on it. Why? Well, because not very many people do that. Of all the resumes I see, I can remember 4 or 5 that I've ever seen with photos. And guess what? I remember those clients forever. Oh, that's the one that had the photo on it. So you will be remembered. You want to stand out. If you have a really long name with 26 or 30 letters in it, you might want to adopt a short name for your resume because you're likely to get a call back faster if the CEO can pronounce your name.
Regarding names,
Mm.
I think would you also think it's important for the HR to know your full name just for documentation purposes?
I suppose. I mean, my name, Jan Pederson, isn't my full name, and
Oh,
your name isn't your full name. So, I
true
mean,
that.
three-letter names, Jan and Ben, neither of which is our actual name. All right, so email and snail mail your resume, follow up with the call saying you're interested in it, or an email. But we actually still have these things called telephones. Got one right here. Use them. Call. They will remember you more if you get called than if you just email, because lots of people email. Okay, securing your interview. Okay, so you got the interview. Okay, in a rural area particularly, take your spouse and children to the site visit and interview if you have a spouse and children. Before you go, research the community and its leaders and find out what the hot button issues in the town are. Ask to have lunch or dinner with the medical staff, ask to see the schools and meet the school officials if you have children, ask to meet civic leaders, religious leaders, real estate agents, and bankers. Very often your employers are going to have that lined up for you, but they'll be really impressed if you express that level and interest in their community.
And just as a note, aren't some of the waiver programs don't they also require evidence that there is a plan to integrate the doctor into the community?
Right. Most of them want to have a recruitment and retention plan, and they take that very seriously in most rural areas.
And just as a humanity issue, if somebody has come to the community and shows a driven interest and an affirmative desire to learn more with the community they're serving, that certainly helps smooth the way for their intake too.
Absolutely. Dress appropriately. We already said that. Navy blue or black suit and tie for men. For ladies, choose a navy blue dress suit, navy blue heels, and a pearl necklace and earrings. All right. Why? I've actually had employers tell me that they've had applicants come to interviews in jeans and a t-shirt. I'm sure none of you would dream of doing that, but just a tip there.
So up next, questions to ask. When you're actually at the interview, what do you need to know about the community and the hospital that you're joining?
Right. Okay. Well, don't be shy. You wouldn't have been invited for the interview if they weren't seriously interested in you. Ask about job opportunities for your spouse in the community if your spouse wishes to work. Many employers I've found over the years will go way out of their way to help the J-1 physician spouse find a job in the community which fits their background and skills, and even residency positions in the area. While they can't guarantee, many have relationships and will help the spouse get a residency.
And that goes further towards tying the physician, welcoming the physician into the community and building more roots for the future.
Right. And then be sure to ask about green card sponsorship policies of the employer. That is very important. One of the most frequent complaints I get from doctors is there was nothing in my contract about green card sponsorship. They said they would do it. I'm in my third year of my waiver and they haven't started it. And I said, well, why not? So remember that a green card can be started before you start work, the day you start work on your waiver job, and any time during it. There are 2 to 3 steps in a green card. The first 2 can be taken before. So don't be shy and ask them if they will pay for other petitions that don't require employer sponsorship, which we'll get to in our next webinar in depth. The Physician National Interest Petition, and EB1As for those of you who are truly and really extraordinary, which many of you are. And if you're married to an American or will be, or to a permanent resident, ask the employer if they will pay for the process, as that saves time and money. Okay, at the interview, tell the employer what you're bringing to the relationship. What are you bringing to the party in terms of your academic and work experience, special expertise in your field? A large number of you have already done residencies in another country, worked in another country. So that employer is really getting 2 for the price of 1. You've done your residency or fellowship twice, once in America, once in another country. They really are getting a bargain. Okay, you might want to have your attendings give a courtesy call to the employer before the interview, saying how wonderful you are and all of that, paving the way. Okay, tell the employer what volunteer work you and your spouse want to do in the community. Many of you have already done throughout medical school, residency, done all kinds of volunteer works, screenings, So participate in health fairs, serve on the boards of medical organizations, give seminars to the nursing staff, and most importantly, ask if they can get you a TV or radio show. Radio shows more practical on the relevant topics. Most small towns have radio stations always looking for interesting content and have call-in talk shows, and they get great ratings. Every client we've had who done it has loved the community, stayed in the community, and also that's a marketing thing for your practice to be on TV. Okay, so we got marketing, providing helpful medical information to the community. One of our clients has a Talk to the Doc radio show every week, and it is a hit, I'm assured.
And from an immigration strategic plan viewpoint, all of these also hit on possible factors for other green card categories as well, potentially.
Well, I mean, I guess if you have a hit radio or TV show, you could become extraordinary ability,
Right,
exceptional
right.
ability.
And also speaking as a former journalist, if a doctor comes out of the woodwork and contacts my organization and says, I'd really like to talk to your readership, or I'd really like to talk to your listeners, that suddenly gets to the top of the list in terms of things that we can prioritize, as a lot of the work has been done for us. So that strongly recommended.
Okay, what you shouldn't do. There may be more on this list. These are the ones I hear from employers. We speak to dozens and dozens of J-1 physicians every year, and many, many employers who tell us about their experiences, all of you. So this is an amalgamation of what we learn talking to you and talking to your employers. Okay, please don't start the interview by asking how much vacation time you get. Employers tell me that happens, yes. Don't ask about the work-life balance demand. This is a double-edged sword. Remember that every employer thinks their employees all have work-life balance. The question is, where is the seesaw? This much work, this much life. I mean, where are you? Leave it alone. It's always assumed. The employers know it. They get aggravated by it. If you're the one that goes in there, saying, I got kids, I got a spouse, I need all this time off, you're probably not going to get that job offer. The employers get this, they know it, but bringing it up at an interview puts you down their list of desirable employees. Don't tell them you really want to move to the area because you have family there. You may have just, as I said before, lowered the offered salary if you're only willing to work in one area where you have family. If the family is only your seventh cousin, the employer will wonder, what are you talking about? That's very real, and I would just counsel you in my role as attorney and counselor, go where your kid is going to have the best chance to go to Harvard, where you're going to make really good money and you're really wanted and you will be respected and desired. I literally had one last week where one spouse wants to move 4 states away where her brother is. She and her husband would reduce their salary if they moved by 40%. Okay, don't advise your first act in office is to be on a long vacation or other voluntary absence. Like I have my sister planned a wedding in my country, and that takes 3 weeks, and I got to go. Please do some planning.
Off on the wrong foot, for sure.
Off on the wrong foot, as we say.
So that's a good list of don'ts. Now let's talk a little bit more about do's, especially about the actual situation on the ground and seeing it with your own eyes.
Okay, so you've done your internet Google research on the community, who's the mayor, who's the this, who's the that, what intelligence questions, what their annual festival is. Every community has some kind of festival. So we've done a lot of waivers in a place called London, Kentucky. And the first thing I ask the clients is, what is it famous for? It's famous for the home of Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's why they need a lot of cardiologists in London, Kentucky. And they have the World Fried Chicken Festival. Knowing those things will be a good way to impress. Always and every time, when you go to the job interview, and then after you get the job and you're there, have breakfast at the local diner. Great way to find out what's going on in the town, who's doing what, how many doctors left in the last 5 years. They'll tell you everything. If the hospital's about to be sold, if, all kinds of things you need to know for your future. You don't want to get there and after a year, the hospital that you work for gets sold to one of the big corporate mega corporations or venture capitalists. That changes your whole job situation. So this is your opportunity to connect. Don't be shy. They're very interested in you. They'll ask a ton of questions, which, as we from big cities know, you don't go in and ask people 1,000 questions when you first get to meet them. They do that in small towns.
Because when you go to a small town, you'll be a big fish in a small pond. It's just the way it works. You go to a city, you'll sink without trace, right?
You'll sink without trace. Hopefully you won't sink. But it's being a big fish in a big sea versus being a big fish in a small sea. Be sure you meet the medical staff, nursing staff, and other workers. You can learn a lot. Okay, in this era when smaller hospitals and medical practices are being gobbled up by corporate America, don't be surprised when you get to work that the nice, small, local practice or hospital you contracted with has been sold to big pharma or a huge hospital chain. It will not be the same job. I get this complaint all the time. When I went there, it was this, and now it's huge, and I won't know anybody.
And so that's so much for the community and the people. Now let's talk about the job and the parameters and the contracts.
Yes, we have the little contract there. Okay. Important considerations. Know the contract you are signing word for word. Have both an immigration lawyer and a physician contract lawyer review your contract and explain it to you. Some considerations. Okay, this concept of RBU and where you expected to fall on the scale. That's your production. You get paid on production. Okay, but USCIS has its own rules for compensation, which it must be aligned with how the employer's compensation formula works. USCIS requires a base salary to be listed on both your H-1B petition and the labor condition application that supports it. Salary cannot dip below that amount except in narrow circumstances. So they can talk about our RVUs all you want, but we have them put in the contract, you will get a base annual salary of a minimum of X. You want to know about staffing levels to be provided, anticipated call schedule, tail insurance, all kinds of things like that. Some state 30 programs require that call schedules be listed and the amount of call. Now, don't be surprised that if your hospital got sold to big pharma or some other huge hospital chains, those staffing levels may not be the same as when you signed the contracts. You guys are signing your contracts 9-10 months before you start. And certainly things change. We all saw that during COVID. The doctors who started during COVID are just finishing their contracts next year. So don't be really shocked if things change.
Very good. And so that's so much about terms between the physician and the clinic or the hospital. For the next slide, let's talk a little bit about terms between the physician and the waiver programs themselves.
Okay. Between the waivers and themselves, well,
Yeah.
what has to be in the contracts, you mean?
No, the rules of waivers and all the different categories of waivers that a person might consider.
Okay, first I want to debunk a bunch of myths. There's a shortage of waiver slots. There is no shortage of waiver slots. We as a group of physician immigration attorneys have worked on opening new avenues, new routes for you to waiver, new pathways. As you know, last year, the year before, we added the Southeastern Crescent Regional Commission, which is listed on your slide, scrc.gov. And just recently added was the Northern Border Regional Commission. And you can find, those are all geographic waiver areas, as does ARC, DRA, SCRC, and then all a bunch of alphabetical names. You can find the areas which are covered by those federal agencies which give waivers. They will list on their websites the states where your job may be located. Now, everyone was really excited when SCRC was added in August of 22, I believe, because it covered all of the Sunshine State of Florida. So obviously, and then recently in the next couple of months, the Northern Border Commission was added. And those are the counties that are hugging the Canadian border from New York, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, whoever else. So you can find your counties. So there absolutely is no shortage of waiver slots. Particularly because all federal programs are open year-round and can give an unlimited number of waivers, year-round, unlimited. So remember that. The State 30 programs are limited to 30 waivers, which is why they're called the State 30 program. Demand for them, however, has decreased as the federal programs have increased in number and their coverage. A real reduction in the demand for the State 30 numbers came about in the spring of 2020 when HHS opened their waiver programs to all facilities with a shortage score of more than 7 nationwide. So anecdotally, it looked like most waivers go to hospitalists. And if the hospitalists have a job offer in a facility with a shortage score of 7 or greater, they can and should use HHS. The other agencies are desirable. Some states require you to go through the federal agency and not the State 30 program if you qualify. New York would be one, Mississippi, West Virginia. Most states certainly encourage it, not all require. HHS is a fabulous program. They do the waivers super quick, a week or two. They did get behind a couple of months ago, but they are amazing. Now, within the State 30, each state is allowed to use at their sole discretion up to 10 of their 30 slots for jobs which are not physically located in an underserved area, but whose patients reside in underserved areas. The willingness of a state to use their Flex 10 waiver slots depends on the demand on their slots for the underserved areas. So keep that in mind. Remember the word flex.
So the federal programs, they're accepting people year-round, applications year-round with no quota limit. Whereas,
None.
whereas a State 30, as the name implies, does have a quota limit. So are they seasonal? Is there a deadline for them to be filed by each year?
Yes, they all have different deadlines, and I'll go through that at the end. The next slide.
So here we have states
Sorry,
accepting
move that so I can see.
states accepting filings in September. We have Iowa, Michigan, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia. And then some do it by lottery.
Only one left. A lot of you are being deterred by the Connecticut State Lottery. We tried like our mightiest to stop them from implementing a lottery because we knew that physicians would be deterred from taking jobs there because they thought they couldn't wait to see if they won the lottery. So if a Connecticut gets more than 30 applications, the deadline this year is October 15th, so you still got a few days. Connecticut applications are quite easy to prepare. And then they hold a drawing in mid-November to determine the winners. So the positive thing there is that you will know by the middle of November if you won the lottery. There's also set-asides for a certain number of those 30 waivers in Connecticut. So don't be deterred. You can always move on to another job if you don't win that Connecticut lottery. Okay, Connecticut, the other ones open and close, Kentucky, October 31st. If they don't get, generally, if they don't get 30, they'll reopen their waiver program. That's true for all of them. Illinois, and then Indiana ends on December 31st. Most of the rest are first come, first served. Remember, like, for example, Kentucky accepts waiver applications till October 31st. It doesn't matter if they get your application on October 1st or October 31st. They will be considered equally. Okay, Jan's preferred state programs. And all of you state 30 on the call today, don't be offended if I didn't name you. There's a very specific reason why I name these states, because it's greatly to the benefit of the J-1 physicians. Those two states are Delaware and South Carolina, to a certain extent Alabama. But Delaware and South Carolina will tell your prospective employer in advance of ever identifying you as a possible candidate that they will give your employer a waiver. So I have a waiver job in Delaware, and I send my paperwork in just for the employer to the state 30 program. And I say, you know, Doc, XYZ medical practice needs 2 neurologists this year. Here's the data. Will you approve them? They then give Dr. Practice XYZ 2 waiver slots. So when you interview for those jobs, you know you have a waiver because the employer has been chosen. The same thing in South Carolina, and to a lesser extent, I believe Alabama. But those where I like those states the best because they're the certainty level. And you can get the job in March or April and still get a waiver in those states if the employer previously reserved a slot for you.
Excellent. So that's a great overview of the program's regional and also geographic. For the next slide, let's take a look at the general waiver requirements, and that is the contract or the agreement between the foreign physician and the U.S. government or the assigning waiver authorities.
Right. And even in the last year or so, some employers have backed out of deals for some really strange inability to comply with some of the rules. So I want you to look at those ideas and get it straight up front that they will do it. It's just a shame to go through all the paperwork and the employer says, oh, I can't sign saying we accept all patients without regard to ability to pay. Waiver goes up in flames after all that work is done. Okay, work has been done. All waivers require employment contracts to provide direct patient care for 40 hours a week for 3 years. Must exclude travel and on-call time from the 40 hours. All right, that's a really simple sentence. It causes a lot of questions, confusion, and consternation. For example, it came up on we have a listserv and a group called the International Medical Graduates Task Force where we toss these concepts around. What if your contract says you could do 32 hours a week patient care and 8 hours of admin time? What if you're a pathologist and you don't ever see a patient? Okay, all those things can be discussed and worked out. The states are pretty reasonable. Okay, we have to have some evidence in almost all cases, both state and federal waivers, that the employer has attempted to recruit U.S. physicians unsuccessfully for varying periods of time. A standard one is sort of 6 months. Next one, the employer has to issue a statement that they agree to treat all patients without regard to ability to pay. This seems to be a sticking point for a number of employers, including universities. I don't really understand it. I think the thing is the fear of uninsured patients wandering into a doctor's office. It's not really very realistic. Okay, the next one, non-compete clauses. Beware and may get that up front. No non-compete clauses permitted in any federal interested government agency waiver and in most state waivers. And also, as you all probably know, that's about to become moot nationwide as there's a national prohibition on covenants to compete. All right, we're going to go quickly. Attempts. The other one that's a problem is No termination without cause during the 3-year period. Got to have that. The other one, which has now become a problem with several of our clients with private practices, is sliding discounted fee schedule. You want to get that out there up front. Some agents, some of the programs require you submit this discounted sliding fee schedule. Some require that you say you will implement it. We'll get into a discussion of that if you have questions. If you Google it, you can figure out what it is and what they require. And they have to have a notice in the waiting room saying, if you are uninsured, if you need help, you may get a discount. Okay, so some of them don't like that, but more realistically, in the real world, how many uninsured patients are going to walk into a private office? Next. Okay.
So those are general requirements that you should keep an eye out. Other things you should keep an eye out for red flags, warning signs, oil on the waters.
Yeah, this is sort of like after you get to work, if you're constantly being told you're not generating enough revenue, seeing enough patients, you may want to step back, take a look. Are there real problems and are you in danger of losing your job? Okay. Read the next one. I trust all of you have seen the Netflix series New Amsterdam and The Resident. I love them. I learned a lot about what you do. So they want you to produce more with less and to sometimes put patient needs last. Can't go below the H-1B LCA wage. If you're put on a PIP, a personal improvement plan, the door is likely about to slam on you and there's documenting, and you know this is a problem, and call a lawyer to see how bad off you are. Practice of sold. Where are you in the mix? That depends on how it's sold. More warning sign. Reluctance of employer to accommodate maternity leave or family leave. If the employment situation you find is unbearable, you have to document extenuating circumstances justifying a transfer to another qualified waiver job to finish your 3 years. Okay.
So that's document. So
Yeah.
an example being, for example, if the community clinic won't give you personal protective gear, then document time, document place, document requests, and so forth to help your attorneys build the best case for you for your next step.
Yes. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. Put them all in your chat box, William. No job is perfect, so try to make it work. We've all been there, done that. Bonus tips for having a successful waiver job and a green card as your pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. Integrate into your community. Invite the boss and their spouse to dinner and share your native cuisine with them. They love it. Volunteer time permitting, particularly a spouse. So many of you, even if your spouses aren't physicians, often they are teachers. They're usually very well educated, volunteers at the school. There's just amazing opportunities. Then you, as the physician, give seminar and topics within your area of expertise. For nurses, other hospital staff, they will be very grateful. Next rule, never to be ever violated. Listen to the nurses. The rule, listen. They can undo you. The rule is that if a nurse does not want you there, it is not whether you will leave, but when. Watch out for that. Understand the equality of the workplace. Do not pull rank on subordinates, conveying the attitude that you must be listened to because you are the doctor. Rather, focus on earning their respect. Go ahead. No, you're going back.
One more to bonus tips, please.
One more.
Thank you. Actually, one more beyond this. One back.
Okay, slide into the old boys network in the community. That's obviously true for rural and smaller towns. Learn golf, tennis, and organize staff appreciation nights, movies, drinks, karaoke. Bring cookies and donuts occasionally. If you care about your patients and the staff, it will show. Beware of the smart young doctor syndrome. You can get run out of town on a rail no matter how good you are. What does that mean? Well, you all are extremely well trained, often at big city hospitals with great technology, great mentors, and all of a sudden you're out in your community and you find maybe older physicians are not practicing what you learned was good medicine.
Mhm.
That's a tragic situation. You don't know what to do. You are torn. You know it's not the best medicine practice. What do? You have to finesse that and get along and do it gradually. Now, pay your respects by a personal introductory visit to the established medical community. Old Doc Smith really appreciates the new doctor in town stopping by to pay your respects. This is old school, old fashioned, still exists. Okay, now we have time for questions. Let's get to them. Okay, we'll go quick. We might go a couple minutes over time.
So we have a question. Can you comment on the minimum clinical time required in a waiver job? And explanation, some academic institutions have a mix of administrative, educational, research, and clinical time. Is it 40 hours per week every week, or can it be an average of 40 hours?
Well, they sure do. What we allowed, what we say is 40 hours per week direct patient care. Contract's got to say that. So the average of 40 hours comes in for hospitalists or those kind of positions where you do shift work. The contract can say 40 hours or per week or 160 hours per month. So if it's 160 hours per month, it can be averaged. It's always a problem with academic institution. It generally gets worked out. Next question.
So the next questions are of a somewhat entrepreneurial mind. The
Mhm.
first one being, are J-1 waiver physicians allowed to engage in private practice during off hours and weekends? Thoughts on that?
That depends. You're talking about moonlighting. In order to do so, you would have to have an H-1 petition. As you all know, once you get the J-1 waiver, you file the H-1 petition, which is the petition that allows you to work. You must work within the four corners of the work locations and the terms of employment listed thereon. So if you're going to go to a private practice during off hours and weekends, you will need to have an H-1 to perform that, except in certain limited circumstances.
And the second question to follow on from that, is it permissible to register a private practice in our own name or in the name of a U.S. citizen spouse, and then to work in that practice during off hours?
Well, you're going to draw the fire from USCIS on that. They wonder if you're really an employer-employee. I always say don't name the
Right.
practice after yourself. Historically, immigration calls that quote unquote self-employment. You have all kinds of considerations about you have to, even if the private practice does an H-1, they have to comply with the general H-1 rules. Does not have to be in a medically underserved area. A lot of people inquire of us about that. At the end of the day, it generally does not work out.
There is a question on the H-1B forms that specifically asks, is the foreign candidate in any way related to or has like an ownership interest in the H-1B petitioning entity? And you can probably imagine if the answer is yes, then immigration takes out its magnifying glass to really scrutinize
Yes, you
that
will get
case.
an RFE and all kinds of nonsense. You can do a part-time concurrent, and that's not too much trouble. Next question.
Next question seems to be about the lottery system. Can you clarify whether it matters when in the lottery period an application is received in order for it to be considered? Are all applications considered equally, regardless of when it was received before the deadline?
Well, yes, that's only Connecticut has it. And you apply, I think, between October 1st and October 14th or 15th. You got a few more days, and the drawing, if they get over 30 applications, the drawing is held in the middle of November, about November 14th. They have a public drawing, just like they do for the $1 billion money lottery. and it's public. You can log in and watch them draw the winners. So you know very quickly within 6 weeks. And a tip about Connecticut, at the time, if you win the lottery, you must be licensed in Connecticut at the time you submit your lottery application. Next question.
This is a follow-on from the multiple work question. Can you work with a private practice in the J-1 waiver and then also work as an adjunct faculty at a medical school?
It depends on how the contract is drawn. If it says research and teaching, how you're paid, there are a number of variables there, right? And work as an adjunct faculty, it depends. How are you paid? Does the practice pay you? Is that listed as a work location in your waiver? There are a number of variables there.
Okay.
Next question.
Next question is about the Delta Regional Authority, the DRA. That waiver has a requirement for liquidated damages clause. So the question reads,
Can you move it up? I can't see it.
does the 250K liquidated damages clause refer to potential damages owed to the hospital and not to the DRA agency? If the hospital waives
Right, that's
clause,
simple. With the DRA, the $250,000 liquidated damages clause can be waived by the employer and the employee, and generally is. The only one that stubbornly refuses to remove it is the Appalachian Regional Commission, and it's paid to the employer, but there are caveats that not very often does that actually happen. The Northern Border Commission tried to put that clause in. I think they're taking it out. I'm having trouble seeing the question there because that's covering it. Okay.
so if the hospital did waive that clause, as we just discussed, does that then mean that there's no payment required
Correct.
to either
No
the
payment
hospital?
required. Yeah.
Okay. And DRA agency itself does not expect liquidated damages payment to it.
No.
Okay.
No, the people that have that clause, it's paid to the employer. Next question, the bottom of that one is,
Do all waivers, including DRA, have a requirement of no termination without cause?
all waivers prohibit that, except a few states, perhaps. Okay, so if we're worried about it, yes, it's no termination without clause, all federal waivers, most all state ones. Right. So that's a federal requirement,
Okay.
not an individual federal program requirement.
Any evidence or any experience, scientific or anecdotal, of SCRC requirements being easier to fulfill?
The SCRC is a wonderful waiver program, extremely helpful, extremely cooperative. We've got them, I mean, to negotiate with them to remove some of the things that were a burden to J-1 physicians and employers. They are absolutely wonderful. They do still charge $3,000 though.
Can you simultaneously pursue a J waiver for a state 30 program and also a J waiver for a federal program?
Big answer, big no, always been no. No, no, no.
And there's a very specific statement that every single physician has to sign that states something to that effect.
Right, there's an affidavit saying I've only applied for one waiver. At which point
in the process to obtain a waiver job are you unable to pursue other employment options?
I would say once the waiver agency, the state 30 or the federal agency has recommended it to the Department of State for the waiver. However, you can, if something happens, you can try to stop it at the Department of State level and just say, I quit, we quit, and make sure you notify everybody by email, every which way you can. But the State Department's position is once they grant the waiver, you are stuck with it.
Can a doctor pursue other educational courses, online MPHs or masters during their waiver?
Absolutely.
Okay. And in your experience, what's the best way to ask about malpractice insurance to employers? What is considered appropriate?
Well, they better have it. And the issue is that who is going to pay for tail insurance when you leave? Or if you leave before the 3 years, who pays the premiums for the tail insurance? Next question.
Here's a hypothetical. In a case of a waiver transfer, How would a doctor go about giving notice if the contract only mentions notice only after the 3 years? So that seems to be, perhaps we might need a clarification here, but it seems to be the contract itself says you can't give notice until after the 3 years.
Well, that person needs to talk to an immigration lawyer and an employment contract. Yeah, obviously, you all know that in America, all contracts can be broken. The issue is at what price?
Mhm.
Professionally, personally, and financially. A lot of contracts say if you leave within 3 years, you have to pay back the sign-on bonus or things like that.
And
So
also,
notice
yeah.
you have to work with your lawyers on, you know, notice after 3 years is rather strange. I think somebody wasn't looking at that employment contract too closely.
And also all physicians should be very familiar with the idea of specialists and specialties and fields of specialization. There is no such thing as too many lawyers. You can have your immigration attorney looking at things, have your contract attorney looking at your contract, and if you have questions about employment law for your state and region, you can also have an employment attorney looking at your employment circumstances too.
Yeah, a
So
tip about that is like, for example, in the real world, there's not much that a university is going to change. I mean, they will change to comply with the absolute minimum for the J-1 waiver. But if you're talking wages, hours, and working conditions, there's not a lot there to negotiate.
let's talk about spouses. What is the fastest way to get an EAD, that is to say, an employment authorization document for an H-4 spouse? How soon can that process be
Yeah,
started after signing the contract?
okay. Easy answer there. We love easy answers occasionally. So, number one, H4 spouse EAD. If the election goes to Trump in November, by January or February, H4 spouses work permits will be abolished. So I have a question here about what will happen if Trump is elected president to we poor J-1 physicians. Okay, so everybody's going to lose their H4 spouse, no more H4 spouse work permit. So I suggest you might get it now in case things don't go well in November. So for now, Rule 1, H1 must have an approved I-140 in order to qualify for an H4 spouse EAD. I-140 approved. The fastest way to get it is to do what immigration calls bundle. File the H1, change the status to H1B, change the status to H4, and the H4 EAD all at once, premium processing. Then the H4 EAD will come within a couple of weeks of when the H1 gets their status. And that obviously with premium processing is 15 calendar days. For an adjudication, note about that, you may have heard from folks that they're all getting RFEs on H1Bs, premium processing filed, and you say, wait, I submitted that. Wait, I did that. Why are they asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just so you know, if you pay this $2,805 premium processing fee now, you get an adjudication within 60 days. Doesn't say, within 15 business days of filing. Doesn't say an approval. So we believe, all the lawyers believe that if they get behind and can't do it in 15 days, they just hit a computer key and issue an RFE. We've gotten 2 in the last week, and we know we submitted it. But anyway, then you have to answer it. Then the 15-day clock stops until they get it. So there are a lot of issues on the H4, but you got to have an I-140. We file a physician national interest petition for the H1B even before they start work if the employer is willing, and get that I-140 approved as premium processing. So premium processing of an I-140 can take up to 45 days. So planning there, you can file the PNIW, and that is the preferred way at this time, because if you do it through the perm labor certification, it takes forever. Next question.
Any thoughts on O1 as a method or a bridge to getting a waiver at a place where you want to be?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on it. we call it the infinite bridge to nowhere. Because if you're in a state, this happens a lot in New York State. People train there, they want to stay there. They got these fabulous hospitals there. They love it. And they say, okay, well, if we can't get you a waiver, J-1 waiver this year, we'll just do an O1 and wonderful, you're on O1 forever. And you try the next year, or maybe not. The institutions in New York are rather limited to how many waivers they can ask for per institution, then the institution decides who to sponsor. So really, if you don't care if you ever get a green card or a waiver, stay on O1 all your life. I think our record was we had a client who was on an O1 13 years before we finally were able to get her a waiver. She loved her job. She wouldn't leave. No way she was leaving. So it took 13 years on an O1. And you can have an O1 initially for 3 years, extendable for 1, sometimes 3 years extensions, forever.
So it sounds like yes, but have a plan.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Next, don't make it the infinite bridge to nowhere.
Hopefully a simple question. Can a doctor travel back to their home country or to other countries if their waiver is already approved by the USCIS?
Wait, what's the question again? Can I see it?
Can I travel back to my country if my waiver is already approved by USCIS?
Well, that's a trick question. A very trick question. It depends on what country you're from. It depends on what visa you're traveling on. If a waiver is approved, it may or may not be a good idea to travel and try to get a new H1 or J1 visa stamp. You know, there's all kinds of variables. J1s are subject to the requirement that you prove you're going to go back home after you finish your J program. If you get a consul who thinks a waiver may mean you're not coming home, they can deny the visa, saying you're an intending immigrant. So that's very fact specific, country specific. There's all kinds of caveats. Generally, lawyers will say don't travel after you get your waiver until you get the H-1B.
Next question. Is there a soft deadline for a national waiver programs application if you're intending to start in July of next year? When does a person who wants to start July
What's the
next year?
question?
Someone wants to start a new job in July of next year.
Right.
When do they need to find a job by? And what milestones, what timing deadlines and milestones do they want for one of the national waiver programs?
Well, there's no real deadline. I mean, this year, the State Department, had a bottleneck that was unbelievable. It took sometimes 4 to 14 weeks for step 2. So, you do it as soon as possible, as soon as you can. Don't rush. Don't sign the first contract that's put in front of you. Be thorough. I mean, you'd like to start work by July 21st, 2025. It doesn't always work out. This year was a particularly bad year. People are still just getting their waivers finalized and their H-1Bs approved. So that would be kind of 2 to 3 months after everybody wanted to start work. So this year, the State Department was a bottleneck. I think it's going to be better next year. Next question.
Question from the Canadian demographic. Any advice on starting to work on an H-1B via the Canadian loophole while waiting for your waiver? Has anyone ever been denied entry in your experience?
Excuse me, but lawyers never call that a loophole. And I was honored to actually negotiate that exception with USCIS back in the 90s. So thank you, Jan, for the Canadian exception. It's called a Canadian exception. Don't say loophole. No, nobody has a problem crossing under the Canadian exception. Remember, you must be a Canadian citizen. It's not good enough to be a landed immigrant there.
Can doctors apply for specialist positions under the SCRC waiver?
Absolutely. All federal programs take all medical specialties with the exception of HHS. Yes.
So one question.
And almost all states take them, and don't worry about the language. If you go to the state website that says, we prefer primary care. They all say that. Don't forget, most programs are run out of the state primary care office. That's de rigueur language. And with the decrease in the demand for the state 30 waivers for primary care, because HHS is now taking care of a huge number of them, it's easier to get a state 30 specialist waiver.
One has asked for a link to the website for the J-1 waiver jobs.
3rnet.org or who typed?
You guys just want me to type it?
Yeah, 3rnet.org.
3rnet.
There
Thank
we
you
go.
so much, Corey.
Okay.
Next one.
What if the waiver is approved before your desired start date? Does the 90-day rule begin after you finish the fellowship?
Great question. No real answer. A lot of people start 90 days after, so we must agree to start work within 90 days of getting the J-1 waiver and H-1B status approved. Okay, so a lot of states haven't updated their rules, but you can't work with the J-1 waiver. What are you gonna do with it? Right? So you have to have J-1 and H-1. It depends. I mean, if you go do it and start 2 years, you run a risk that they'll say, you didn't play by the rules here. You know, if it's a legal impossibility because you don't have a medical license, you haven't finished your training and you're not even eligible for it, I mean, don't have a license, it just isn't a problem. Unless you do something like, you know, do it 2 years ahead of time or something.
For non-lottery states, does it matter at what stage of the open enrollment or open applications you apply? Is
Absolutely.
it earlier the better?
Absolutely, it does. We went through that on the states, some of the states that have application deadlines. We will make the PowerPoint available to you, and the states are listed. So if you're doing a federal waiver, you have no time pressures because they're open year round and given unlimited numbers. They give away as many applications as qualify. Okay, can I see the last question again, please?
What happens if I do not get a spot through the state 30 program and I'm doing a fellowship? Are there other ways to pursue a waiver?
Well, yes, there's actually hardship and persecution waivers, which we're going to cover in our upcoming webinar in October. You can go on an O1 visa. There are many options.
Next question. How is the green card application changed during a J-1 waiver if somebody has a U.S. citizen spouse? And what is the employer's obligation in that scenario?
Well, the employer has no obligation. If you're applying through your U.S. citizen spouse, you may actually file the green card application once you've completed 3 years of your waiver employment. Again, our next seminar is going to concentrate on green cards and all the nuances. Next one.
Do I need to have an employment lawyer to assist me with negotiating the terms of my contract?
Wait, the last one you missed. Can you work in Canada and are a permanent resident there, but your statement of need was issued from India? Can you still say that you completed 2 years? Nope. You're going to India. Remember that the country to which you have to return is always and will be the country that issued your statement of need, which is generally your country of last residence.
More general question. Do I need to have an employment lawyer to assist me with negotiating the terms of my contract? And how do I choose the right immigration attorney?
Well, if you're only interested in the J-1 provisions, your J-1 immigration attorney can do it, and he or she will likely refer you to an employment lawyer if they think you need it. A lot of people use lawyers just to review the terms of their contracts and tell them what it says. Not negotiation, but saying this is what you're getting into. How do I choose the right immigration attorney? Well, we'd love it if you chose us. You want experience, accessibility, and a good sense of humor and experience. That always helps.
How strict is SCRC on the duration of job advertising?
They're reasonable. they require some sort of advertising within 45 days, or sorry, not, wait, it's a 45-day rule. The advertising has to be completed more than 45 days before filing or so. It's a 45-day rule. But people get confused on all the advertising. You don't have to do it every single day for 6 months, for example, or every single day for 45 days. But SCRC is extremely reasonable. We've had people with, advertising issues, and they're very reasonable. Some of you may remember that initially they said you had to advertise nationally, regionally, and locally. They've cut out all that, and a national ad should be fine.
How long can you stay in the U.S. after the approval of the waiver by the USCIS, but while your H-1B petition is still pending?
Well, as long as you file the H-1 petition prior to the expiration of your J-1 30-day grace period, you may stay here and wait for a decision. You may not work until you're granted H-1 status.
But
Wait, go back. You missed a very important one. If Trump is elected, will the J-1 waiver program be affected? Oh, Lord, what a question. Okay, well, we can go back to the last presidency. Everyone will be affected because it's likely that all green card applications will require a personal interview, both employment and family-based. So the lines will be very long. During the last administration, our substantive things during the J-1 program, in the J-1 programs, were not really affected. So lines are going to get longer. If he implements the Muslim ban, those who are from Muslim countries will be impacted. If you're really bored, go read Project 2025, and he says what he's going to do. Next.
For the state of Tennessee, can the waiver contract contain a termination without cause clause?
I don't know. I'd have to check. They're very reasonable in Tennessee. I mean, in reality, don't get too hung up on that. In reality, if it doesn't work out, you want a resignation and a termination without cause, and likely your employer wants the same. Okay, so Tennessee, we finished up on Tennessee. Okay, Alaska, next question.
The next question after that was returning home for 2 years, satisfying the 2 year
Yes, coming back. You can come back and you can take any job. The caveat there is the employer must be H-1 cap exempt, or you must go in the annual H-1B lottery.
So there's no disadvantage, but you're treated like any other H-1B applicant.
Right, and hopefully you have to get a job generally. You may be immigrating through your spouse. Next question. As a married couple,
both requiring J-1 waivers, is there any specific advice to facilitate the waiver process? Any particular provisions or for the scenario?
Well, some states have formal or informal policies of trying to keep couples together, so they may give some preference in allocating the waivers. That would apply only to the state 30. Some communities love having couples. We just did one in community one. Husband was a GI and wife was an interventional cardiologist. So yeah. Okay, from Rhode Island, our lovely Jill is on the line. She has said Rhode Island welcomes married couple and we reserve slots. There you go. Next question. Alaska has never.
Judy Holland has volunteered that Alaska has never filled its 30 J-1 slots and would be happy to accommodate couples. Having seen Alaska on the summer cruises, it is breathtaking. Seriously consider it.
And having a lot of relatives who live in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, they desperately need doctors. My sister lives on an island and has to fly to Juneau for medical treatment, or Seattle. So you're welcome in Alaska. It's a beautiful place, and they want you. So couples, that's great.
Again, for a family-based question, say the physician is a J-1, the spouse is a J-2, but the two spouses have different home country requirements on their visas. So in order to satisfy that, would they really have to go to two separate countries and then use their skills in two separate countries?
Well, if they decide to go home, yes.
Interesting. So in such a situation, we really look at the waiver.
Yeah, you might want to look at a hardship or persecution waivers. Now, another myth I want to debunk here is one waiver at a time, yes, but you can have hardship, persecution, and a federal or state 30 waiver pending at the same time. So no, federal and state one at a time, but you can have hardship, persecution, and an interested government agency waiver. Now, in this era with lots of temporary protected status programs, and given we have an election coming up, if you're eligible for TPS, temporary protected status, you obviously should apply. It will not impact your J-1 status. It runs parallel along the way. So please do that now, immediately, if you're eligible. I mean, you'll want to talk to an attorney to discuss any nuances because this isn't legal advice, remember. Quickly, the country eligible for TPS right now: Afghanistan, Burma, Cameroon, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Haiti, Honduras, Nepal, Nicaragua, Somalia, and South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Yemen. So if you are a citizen of those countries, you want to apply, if you can, you obviously get the status and a work permit. So don't ignore that and say, I'm okay, I'm with Jay, I got a waiver, just do it.
Last question in the list. For academic institutions, is the average salary reported in the AAMC faculty salary survey a reasonable salary? Is it usually negotiable?
University salaries are rarely negotiable. You generally, if it's a state institution, you will have two salary pots, one from the state and one from the employer. There will always be, there's a private practice group affiliated with the university. Better than MGMA, ask your friends, what the salaries are looking like. So with that, we will conclude today's session, and please feel free to send us, and thank you for all of you for attending, and I really enjoy hearing from you, so let us hear from you.